All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. Incredible daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, Baruch Meir and Rena Dubin. May Hashem continue to protect our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. May all our children remain safe and complete a year of learning with deep connection to the land and Hashem's Torah. To thank Naftoli and Chava Tilson of Eretz Yisrael, in gratitude to Naftoli's Chaver, Benjamin Wohl, for introducing him to the Daf. May Hashem bless us all to finish the Daf Yomi cycle together and celebrate with the Siyum together in Eretz Yisrael. Amen. We'll see with that. Let us begin. Very exciting Gemara today. Really incredibly exciting Gemara. Top of Lamed Ches, 38. We'll say we begin. Nikanar Naas Nisim Ladatos. So remember again, the Mishnah went through a variety of different people, a number of different people, all who made certain changes and additions for the benefit of the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says now, Nikanor miracles were done for his doors. So remember again, what's very exciting about this is that, remember, this entire time we've been focusing a lot on Shar Nikanor, because Shar Nikanor is the one eastern gate. So remember again, this was the major point of entry from the Azara, from the courtyard, into the Beis Hamikdash itself. That one gate over here, you go up the 12 steps, you come into Ezra's Raglei Yisrael, or I should say Makom Raglei Yisrael, Drisas Raglei Yisrael, Makom Drisas Raglei Kohanim, as you saw in the Dapim over Yom Tov. So the Gemara says that there were miracles performed for the doors of Nikanor. So Tanra Rabbanan, Man Nisim Nasul Datos of Amru. What were the miracles? Supposed to listen to this incredible Gemara. Kishahalach Nikanor Lahavi Datos Alexandria Shamitzrayim. So listen to this. Nikanor had the doors fashioned in Alexandria. That's where they were fashioned. So obviously, after they were made in Alexandria, they had to be transported from Egypt to Eretz Yisrael. We're going to see they're transported by boat. So what happens? So Nikanor went with them. So Bechaziraso Amad Alav Nachshol Shabayam Litovo. So amazingly enough, so as he was coming back, so a huge swell. So there were waves that threatened to capsize the boat that Nikanor was on. Notlu achas mehen v'tilu liyam. So the sailors on the boat took one of the doors of Nikanor and threw them overboard, because they felt that they had to lighten the load of the boat in order to avoid capsizing. So they threw it overboard. But still, the sea was raging. Bikshu lahatel es chaverta. They were about to throw the other door overboard. Listen to this. Amatu the karcha. Nikanor went over to the door and he threw his arms around the door. And he said to the sailors, Amar lahem, hitiluni ima. If you throw the door overboard, I go with it. I go with it. Miyad nachaya mizapo. Immediately afterwards, the sea calmed down. V'haya mitzta'er al chaverta. So on one hand, so let's say there's a whole mahalich in the Ben Yoyada, which we'll discuss about this. So Nikanor saw that obviously, again, he was happy one door was salvaged, but he was very sad. Remember, again, this is for the Beis Hamikdash. So you have to ask yourself, what good is one door going to really do? Kevan, Shegil and Amala Shal Akko, when they came to the port of Akko, Haisa Mivasretzes Vyotze Mitachas Dofne Asina. Listen to this. So when they arrived in the port of Akko, they found that the door which was cast overboard was actually bobbing underneath the boat. So they threw the door overboard, but the door remained with the boat the entire time. And when they got to Akko, they were able to retrieve the other door as well. So the Gemara says, V'yish omrim, bria beria shabiyam balasa, v'kiyasa yabasha. Others say that there was some large sea creature which had swallowed up the door and ultimately spit the door onto the shore. Va'aleh Amar Shlomo, and about this episode, Shlomo HaMelech prophetically wrote, because obviously Shlomo HaMelech is before Nikanor, Koros Batinu Arazim, literally the beams of our home of the Beis Hamikdash are cedar wood, Rihitenu Berusim, the doors are of cypress, Al Tikri Berusim, rather Ella Brias Yam. So don't read it Berusim, rather Brias Yam, a sea creature which swallowed up the door made by Nikanor. Lefichach. Therefore, so we'll say, we'll discuss this later on, that at a certain point, the Beis Hamikdash there were modifications which were made, and one of the modifications was all of the doors we're once again coated, or we're coated, not once again, but we're not coated. What's the word? Oh, I'm sorry. Overlaid. I'm sorry. Plated, thank you. We're plated with gold. We're plated with gold. So the Gemara says, Chutz mishari Nikanor, with the exception ultimately of Shari Nikanor. Why? Because everyone knew the miracle of Nikanor's doors, and therefore they wanted to leave them as is. They did not replate them with gold. So the Gemara says, or they did not plate them with gold. The Omrim, others say there was a different reason they didn't plate them with gold, which was because apparently it was this type of gold-like copper, which had the appearance of gold already, therefore didn't need to be plated with gold. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, Nechoshes klunaisa haisa b'haisa me'ira kishal zav. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says was this other type, Nechoshes klunaisa. Rashi says mizukekes, a very refined copper, and ultimately again it emanated the light just as if it was gold. So I will say an incredible story. This is the story of Shar Nikanor. These are stories, and I both say, the Ben Yehoyada has a whole mahalach on this, as I mentioned, and he said, what was the pshat? What's the pshat with this whole story? In other words, obviously, when you see a story like this and you see the storm, so the point over here is that the storm was somehow related to Shari Nikanor, was somehow related to these doors. This is very reminiscent of which story? Of Yona. Right, good. Right, I know what you meant. Right, of Yona. Right. So again, your mamash in a heavy mindset this morning. Mamash. Right. So it's very reminiscent. Again, in many ways. First of all, the turbulent sea, something being thrown overboard to silence the sea. According to the second opinion, the sea creature. So I will say. So the Ben Yehoyada says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was giving Nikanor an opportunity to go ahead and show his Mesiras Nefesh. What was he willing to go ahead and engage in self-sacrifice for? And I will say, there's a very profound lesson, which is in life, you have to have something you're willing to go overboard for, right? So what in life are you willing to go overboard for? What in life are you willing to wrap your hands around and say, no, if this goes, I go. And everybody, you have to believe in something. You have to believe in something. Although we believe in many things, there are certain things which are so near, certain things which are sober. It reminds me, I remember that my grandfather, Zichrono Livracha, never told me this, but my mother, she should live and be well, mentioned this to me. She said that one of her early childhood memories was her father, my grandfather, Zichrono Livracha, looking for change in between the cushions on the couch or on the floor by the couch, because my grandparents, when they came here after the war, so my grandfather would get a job, and he refused to work on Shabbos. So the employers would tell him, if you don't come here on Shabbos, you don't have a job. And week after week, he would lose his job. Week after week. He had 4 young children. Week after week would lose his job. See, that's an example of throwing your arms around. And that's incredible, Mesiras Nefesh. I don't know that to be hard to be faced with an isayon like that. Supporting your family versus Shabbos. But you see that the koach of the Jew is to throw your arms around something and to say, I'm not giving this up. I'm not giving this up. No matter what happens, I'll go overboard with it. So for Nikanor, it was the doors of the Beis HaMikdash. For Jews throughout the millennia, it was Shabbos. For all other mitzvahs, but the shaila is, am I committed to something enough that I'll throw my arms around it and I'm willing to go overboard with it as well? Incredible Gemara. But let's say Mishnah, ve'ilu l'ginai. So we'll say, so it's interesting. Here's the contrast. In the last Mishnah, so we learned about individuals who were remembered l'tova, right? Zecher tzadik livracha. Well, we'll get to Zecher tzadik livracha. But we learned about people who did great things, like Nikanor, like Ben Katan, others. Now the Mishnah is going to highlight people who unfortunately did not engage in the right behavior. And actually, it's interesting. We'll say what's great about this is a lot of Amud Aleph. What we're going to see, we actually just saw not so long ago in Maseches Shkalim. Incredible. So ve'elu l'ginai. These are the people who are remembered in a more disparaging fashion. Beis Garmu, shelo ratzu lilamed or lilamed al ma'aseh lechem aponim. Beis Garmu, they were the bakers. They knew the secret to the lechem aponim, and yet they did not want to share it. Shal beis avatinas, lo ratzu lilamed al ma'aseh aktoras. So beis avatinas, they were in charge of the ketoras. They were kahanim. They did not want to go ahead and teach anyone about the secret of the Ketoras. Hogrus ben Levi, this is interesting. Hugros, who was a Levi, Yahya Yodea Perek Bashir, Velo Ratza Lalamed. He knew how to produce music with his fingers. Right? He would position his fingers in his mouth, and he knew how to produce beautiful melodic music. Velo Ratza Lalamed. He did not want to go ahead and teach anyone this secret. Ben Kamtsar Lo Ratza Lalamed Amay Saksav. We're going to see Ben Kamtsar was able to tie 4 quills to his fingers and simultaneously write 4 letters, four different letters, right? So for example, Yud K Vav K, the name of Hashem, he was able to write it in one movement, and he did not want to go ahead and teach anyone this trick. So the Gemara says, about the people mentioned in the previous Mishnah, Munvaz, Helenia Malka, Ben Kantin. These people, Zeichet Tzadik Livracha, the name or the memory of the righteous shall be for a blessing. Va'al Elu Ne'amar B'Shem Rishaim Yirkav. And about these individuals mentioned in our Mishnah, we apply the dictum in Mishnah, it's the same pasuk. B'Shem Rishaim Yirkav, the names of the wicked should rot. Now, we'll say, right off the bat, that's strong, right? Remember again, I just want to point out, the people mentioned here in the Mishnah didn't commit Averos. They didn't commit Averos. What didn't they do? They didn't share information. Which Rabbosai tells you an incredible Musar. I mean, we'll see their stories. Incredible Musar. Which is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you a koach, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you a talent, He doesn't give it to you for you. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't give us our abilities just for us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us abilities to be able to build up those around us. So if I go ahead and I take my kochos and I keep them just for me, I take my kochos and all I do is plow them inward and I don't use them to build up those around me, V'shem Rishayim Yirkav. The Mishnah calls such a person a Rasha. Both say so incredibly profound. Incredible. Turn Rabbanon. Base Garmu Hayu Bikir Ma'aselecha Apana. Both say here we go. Again, this is actually Chazor from Shkalim. Very exciting. So the Garmu family, they were in charge of the Lechem Aponim. V'lo Ratzu L'Lamed. But they did not want to teach anyone how to do it. Both remember again, the Lechem Aponim was incredibly unique in that it was essentially shaped like a box. So you had a bottom, you had narrow sides, and then a narrow top and a hollow middle. So it was complicated to go ahead. First of all, we're going to see actually it wasn't complicated to bake lechem aponim. It was complicated to remove lechem aponim from the oven without breaking it. So the Gemara says, so the Garmu family didn't want to teach anyone. Well, the rabbis got fed up with them and decided, let's fine, so let's outsource this. Let's get someone else. So Shalchu Chachamim ve'eviu umnei Alexandria shel Mitzrayim. So the Chachamim brought expert bakers from Alexandria. V'hayu yodin le'efos kimosan, v'lo hayu lirdos kimosan. So these expert bakers from Alexandria, they were able to bake the bread, but they weren't able to remove the bread without breaking it. Shalalu masikim b'achotz va'ofin mibachotz, v'alalu masikim mibifnim va'ofnim mibifnim. So it's interesting. The Garmu family, they used to go ahead and heat the oven and bake inside of the oven. The Alexandrian craftsmen, they baked on the outside of the oven with the heat source outside of the oven as well. Halalu piton misapeshes, valalu ein piton misapeshes. The problem was that the bread of the Alexandrian bakers went bad, it became moldy. But yet the bread of the Garmu family did not spoil. Kishashamu chachamim bedavar, when the chachamim saw that no one else was able to replicate the lechem hapanim of the Garmu family, Amru, they said, it's clear from here, whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, He created for His kavod. Shneimar, kalanikra b'shmi u'lichvodi barasiv. So they realized that, look, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave this wisdom to the Garmu family and didn't give it to anyone else, it's obviously the Ratzon Hashem that the Garmu family have it and not other people. So we'll say, watch this. This is great. Come on. So the rabbis once again reinstated the Garmu family back to their position of baking lechem upon him. But the Garmu family said, Sholchem chachamim v'lo bo. So Chacham said to the Garmu family, we'd like to invite you back to the Beis Hamikdash to do your work. And the Garmu family said, no. Kaflu lahen scharo. So we'll say, what happened? The Garmu family demanded contract renegotiation. Oh, you want us back? No problem. And we'll say they ended up settling for double their wage. Shnei mana, every day they took 12 mana. V'hayom esrim ba'arbaba. Then they doubled their wage to 24 mana. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, b'chol yom esrim ba'arba, v'hayom arba'im u'shmona. All right, so machlok is what the original wage was. Point is, they came back to work only after they renegotiated their contract for double the wage. So we'll say after this, it's interesting. Amar lahem chachamim, mari isem shelo lelamed. So the chachamim said, tell me, Garmu family, why don't you want to teach anyone about the secret of the lechem hapanim? Amar lahem, so the Garmu family said, Yodin hayu shal beis abba, shebayis ze asid licharif. We know that the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed. Shema Yilmod, and by the way, this is Bayesheni. Shema Yilmod Adam She'ena Mohugan. Perhaps someone who is unworthy will learn the secret of Lechem Hapanim. V'yelech v'yavod avodos kochavim b'kach, and he will come to go ahead and worship idolatry with it. So we'll say what they were concerned about was that someone will use the process of the Lechem Hapanim for avodah zarah. Therefore, again, they felt the only way to prevent that was never divulge the secret of baking it. So the Gemara says, "Va'al davar zeh maskirin osan l'shvach." And regarding the following, we'll say, I just want to point out also, isn't it fascinating that when did the rabbis have the conversation with Beis Garmu? When did they have the conversation? Only after on. So we'll say there's a very important lesson to be learned in here, which is, you see, Chazal took it for granted that Garmu had only selfish motivations for not going ahead and divulging the information. But it turns out they had good intentions. Now, Chazal still did not like their intentions, as we'll see in just a moment. But it's so often in life it happens this way, where first you have the fallout and then you have the conversation. Wouldn't it be so much better in life to first have the conversation and potentially avoid the fallout? An incredible yisod. And even though, again, Chazal faulted them for not divulging the secret recipe of the lechem hapanim, there was something that Chazal felt was very praiseworthy about the Garmu family, which was me'olam lo nimseis pas nekiya biyad b'neihem. In the Garmu family, no one ever ate bread made from fine flour. Shelo yomru mimaisa lechem hapanim zen nizonin l'kai mashenemar v'yisim nekiya me'Hashem yisrael. This is very beautiful. The Garmu family was makbid. They never ate bread made from fine flour. Why? Because they were concerned that people might say, oh, they're making the lechem hapanim for themselves as well. So as to avoid any level of suspicion, they never ate fine flour bread. And the Gemara quotes the pasuk of V'yisem Nikim, which Rabbi says is an incredible yisod. Because V'yisem Nikim means like this. Sometimes we go through life and we say, I don't care what anyone thinks, as long as I know I'm doing the right thing, that's all that matters. And that is false. That's not correct. We do care what other people think, I mean, to a degree. But the idea is that my actions have to be able to stand on their own. The Yisem Nekiyim means that when someone looks at my actions, my goal is that my actions should speak for themselves. My actions shouldn't need a Rashi and the Tosus, and sometimes Rishonim and Achronim also, right? But my actions should be self-explanatory, that they're good, that they're proper, that they're upright. So we'll say, so I'll tell you something interesting about this. The Maharsha, very quickly, because we mamish don't have time, but the Maharsha comments on this Gemara. And the Maharsha says, I'll just quote you very quickly. The Maharsha, let's see if I think I... So the Maharsha says like this: if you notice the progression of the Gemara, even after the Garmu family gives their explanation for why they don't want to share the recipe, the rabbis are still not happy with them. Right? Remember again, so the Garmu family says, it's not that we're being territorial about this. We have a Masorah, the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed, and we don't want the recipe to fall into the hands of the Avodah Zarah. So it's interesting that so the Maharsha comments, he says, Va'alzeh maskirin osol l'shvach. So he says, Mechober l'maiseh shemei olam nitzeis kver shashi, haval hashelo rotzu l'lamid v'nasim talmud divrayim mishum deshama yomol adam sheino hagun b'azeh maskira osol l'shvach delo ha'aminu chachamim lahem ela de kavanasan laharbos charam. So the Maharsha says, interestingly enough, you would have thought that after the Garmu family goes ahead and gives them the explanation, we don't want to share the recipe of lechem hapanim because the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed. We don't want it to fall into the wrong hands. Yet, they're still grouped together with this grouping in the Mishnah of V'shem Risha'im Yirkov. So the Maharsha says the rabbis didn't believe them. They did not believe that that was the motivation of Garmu family. They believed that the Garmu family did not divulge the information because at the end of the day, it was a monetary issue. They did not want, they wanted the monopoly. They wanted the monopoly. So even though they gave the reason, Chazal did not believe the reason. Bless you. Rabbi Soloveitchik comments on this Gemara, and he says there's something else. He says the reason why the reason doesn't redeem the behavior of the Garmu families, even if they were telling the truth, you cannot go ahead and live your life. That a Jew doesn't live with a hashkafa of impending doom. We don't live with that hashkafa. So there's no such thing as saying, well, we know for sure the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed. You know for sure? Nothing is for sure until it happens. So to go ahead and live life saying, we know the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed, and therefore will not share the recipe, says the Rav, is not the proper hashkafas hachayim of a Jew. If you have a Masorah, there's going to be a destruction. There's only one thing you have to worry about. What can you do to change that? What can you do to change that? But to accept Churban as a fait accompli, to accept Churban as an immutable future, an unchangeable future, that is an unacceptable hashkafas hachayim. This goes back to the Gemara that says, Misar from David HaMelech's family, afilu cherev chad munachas al tzavaro shel adam. Even if there is a sharp sword against your neck, al yimana atzma min arachamim. You never stop asking Hashem for compassion. There is no such thing as a done deal until the circumstances unfold in an irreversible way. But until the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, there's always the possibility to save it. And for you, Garmu family, to accept this fate to complete that the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed and to do nothing about it, that's V'shem Mishayim Yerkov. That's Rishus. That's Rishus. We'll say incredibly profound. So the Gemara goes weiter. Tan Rabbanon. Beis Avatinas. Next. Avatinas family. How you became my Torahs. So the Avatinas family, they were experts in making of the Ketoras. Below Ratzul Lamed, and once again, they also did not want to share the secret recipe. So what happens? Once again, the rabbis went and they brought craftsmen, experts from Alexandria. So the Gemara says, "V'hayu yodin lefatim kimosam, v'lo hayu yodin lahalos ashan kimosan, shal halalu mitamer va'ola kimakel, shal halalu maftzia lekan lekan." So as I said, what happened? The craftsmen were able to recreate the recipe. What couldn't they recreate? In the Avatinas family, the smoke of the Ketores went up in a straight pillar. For the spicers, what would be the craft? We'll call it the craftsmen. For the craftsmen, ultimately of Alexandria, they were able to recreate the mixture, but when the smoke went up, it dissipated. So what happened? So when the Chacham saw this, they realized, okay, we tried. Obviously, again, this is the Ratzon of Hashem, that it comes just from the Avatinas family. So they went to re-engage the Avatinas family. Both say same story. The rabbi said to the Avatinas family, we'd like to reinstate you. Avatinas family would not show up. So what happens? They offer to double their wages, and then ubo. Then the Beis Avatinas family comes to work. Okay, Shabbos says the same thing. Whatever their wage was, started out at 12, went to 24, started at 24, went to 48. Baruch Hashem, contract renegotiation, they were able to double their wages. Both say it's the same story. The dialogue happens after the fallout. So the Chazal said, tell us, why won't you share? Why won't you share the recipe? So the Gemara says, Amru Yodin Hayu Shal Beis Abba, Shebai is Asuli Charib. Both say it's the same narrative. That Avatinas, just like Garmu family, said we have a Masorah from our father, that the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed. Shema Amru Shema Yilmot Adam Shena Mahugan, V'yelech V'yavod Avodas Kochavim Bekach. And we are scared that if we divulge the recipe, someone will ultimately use it for idolatry. So that's again, and the Maharsha, same thing. Not so, no one really, but the Chazal didn't seem to really believe them. Rabbi Soloveitchik, same idea. You can't live life with the hashkafa of impending doom. You must maintain optimistic and hopeful outlook until it is no longer viable. However, there was something very good about the Avatinas family, which was Me'olam lo yatsa kala mevusemes mi batehen. This is interesting. The women of the Avatinas family never wore perfume. And not only that, when the sons would marry a woman from another family, there was a t'nai with the marriage that any woman who marries into the Avatinas family, you have to agree never to wear perfume. Why? Because there was a concern, the Avatinas family was concerned that if the woman would wear perfume, people may accuse them of what? Of using the ketores for their own perfume purposes. Therefore, again, the Gemara says, "L'kaim Hashem v'isem nikim me'Hashem u'mi Yisrael." Ultimately, again, v'isem nikim. This way again, their actions were beyond reproach. Incredible. Tanya, Amar Bishma. Bishma said, "As pam achos hayisi mahalich baderech." One time I was walking, umatzasi echa mibnei b'neihem. One time I found a descendant, I came across a descendant of the Avatinas family. Amarti, when I said to this young man, Avosecha bikshu laharbos kvodan, v'ratzu lema'it kvod hamakom. Your forefathers wanted to increase their own covet at the expense of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, their covet, this is the right to the Maharsha, that the rabbis really did not believe their excuse. And at the end of the day, the reason the Avatinas family did not want to divulge the secret of the Ketores was to be able to corner the market, to keep a monopoly. So Rabbi Shmuel says to this guy, your ancestors wanted to go ahead and maintain their own covet, and v'rotzu l'ma'it kavod hamakom, and to diminish the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Achshav kavod hamakom bimkomo u'mi'et kvodam. But now your covet has been diminished because the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, but the Ribono Shel Olam's covet is still intact, which I will say also is a very powerful yisod, that although the absence of the Beis Hamikdash, right, doesn't allow HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence to be felt in the same way, the ultimate covet of the Ribono Shel Olam is still intact. LaHashem ha'aretz u'mala'o. That ultimately, again, the world is still the domain of the Ribono Shel Olam, even in the absence of the Beis Hamikdash. I'm Rabbi Akiva. But another story. Rabbi Akiva said, Pam achas sachli Rabbi Shmuel ben Luga. So one time, Rabbi Shmuel ben Luga told me the following story. Pam achas yatsasi ani ve'echa mibnei bneihem asada. So Rabbi Shmuel said, one time, I went out to the field with one of the descendants of the Avatinas family. L'lakit asavim, to go ahead and collect herbs. V'ra'isi shesachak ubacha. And I saw that this young man, he laughed and he cried. Amarti lo mipnei bachisa. So Rabbi Shmuel said to this young man from the Avatinas family, tell me, why did you cry? Amrli kavod avosai niskarti. Because I remembered the once glorious, position of my family. Right? I remember that once upon a time my family had so much covet. Umipnei masachakta. Why did you laugh? Amrli sha'asir HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahachzira lanu. And this young man said, because I know that the Ribono Shel Olam will once again restore our family to its former glory. Umipnei manis karta. And so Rabbi Shmuel says to this young man, what is it that you saw that jogged your memory in this way? Amrli ma'ale ashan kenegdi. So he said, I saw the spice or the herb called ma'ale ashan. I will say ma'ale ashan was the herb which was responsible for causing the smoke to go up in a straight pillar. So he said, and remember, that was the secret of the Ketores, because as you saw, the Alexandrian craftsmen were able to recreate the rest of the Ketores. They were unable to get the smoke to go up in a straight pillar. So he said, I saw the Ma'ala Ashan, it reminded me. So Rabbi Shmuel says to this young man, he says, Hereoli, can you show me? Can you show me which herb is the Ma'ala Ashan? Amrali Shvua hi biyadenu she'in marin oso l'chol adam. So the young man said to Rabbi Shmuel, we took an oath that we would never divulge the identity of the Ma'ala Ashan plant to anyone. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, Pam achas matzasi zakin echad umegilas samamanim biyado. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, one time I came across an old man, and there was a secret, there was a spice scroll, a Torah scroll, which had the names of all of the spices, including Ma'ala Ashan inside of it. And I said to him, Amarti lo me'ayinata, and Rabbi Shmuel, man, where are you from? Amrali mi beis Avatinas ani. And the old man said, me, I am a member of the Avatinas family. Oma biyadcha, tell me, what's in your heart? Well, what's in your heart? What's in your hand? Amarli Megillas Samemanim. It's a scroll with all the spices. Hereoli. Ultimately, again, and Rabbi Yochanan says, show it to me. Amarli, the old man said, when my family, the Avatinas family, was alive, we took a shvur that we would never share it with anyone. However, Akshav harehu lacha. The old man says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, I'm hereby giving over this scroll to you. It's yours. Ultimately, again, be careful with it. So they will say this is the moment of transition, where a member of the Avatinas family gives over the spice scroll to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, entrusts Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri with the secret, and tells him to be careful with it. Ukishabasi v'sachti dvarai lefnei Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, when I came and I told over this episode before Rabbi Akiva, Amar li me'ata aser l'saper biginu son. From this point forward, we are not allowed to speak disparagingly about the Avatinas family. Why? Because effectively the Avatinas family has done tshuva. By handing over the spice scroll to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, sharing the secret of the Ketores, the family has effectively done tshuva, which I will say is actually incredible, because what you see over here is sometimes one person could redeem the honor of an entire mishpacha, right? This old man gave over the secret of the Ketores Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, thereby redeeming the entire mishpacha. So the Gemara says, "Mikan Amar ben Azai b'shimcha yikarucha ubimkomcha yeshivucha." I will say before you turn the page, look at Rashi. Mikan Amar ben Azai mimaise beis garmu ubeis abatina. So first of all, before we go on, it's interesting. It's also clear that the Avatinas family did tshuva. How do we know that? Because remember, we still have a chamber that is named after them. So remember again, it's still called the Avatinas chamber, right? We saw that. Remember again, that was on your Beis Hamikdash map. So Nun Aleph is your Lishkas Beis Avatinas. Over here, remember again, we saw before, that's where the Kohen Gadol was going during the 7 days of preparation to prepare for the Ketores. The fact that the chamber still retained the family name is indicative of the fact that at least at some point in time, so they were redeemed. Somehow they redeemed their name. So the Gemara ends off this section by saying as follows: Mikan Amar ben Azai. Look at Rashi. Based on this, Ben Azai says, Mimaise beis garmu ubeis havatinas shebikshu chacham lidchosam kom lo yachon. I will say, here's something very interesting. You see from the two stories over here that Chazal wanted to go ahead and kind of remove the Garmu family and the Avatinas family from their respective positions, but they were unable to do so. So Ben Azai says, what do you see from here? You see from here, B'shimcha yikarucha, bimkomcha yoshivucha. Literally, again, with your name they will call you. From your place they will seat you. Amud Beis, umil shelcha yitnu lacha. And from yours they will give to you. Which Ben Azai essentially is saying, whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu has ordained for a person, that's what's going to happen. So Chazal wanted to dispossess Garmu family and Avatinas family. Yet it's clear that HaKadosh Baruch Hu ordained that Lechem Aponim would only come from the Garmu family. And ultimately, again, Ketores would only come from the Avatinas family. Now, I will say, now, what Ben Azai is trying to highlight over here is a din in Parnasa. In fact, the last Rashi on Lamed Ches on the Aleph says, Lo yidag Adam lomar, Ploni yikapeach parnasasi, ki al karchach b'shem yikarucha, lava v'lashu b'mkomcha. But let's say you see from here that parnasa is ordained from the Ribono Shel Olam. And whatever Hashem wants you to have, no one else could take from you. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted Garmu family, Avatinas family, to have their parnasa in this particular way. And even though, again, we imported craftsmen from Alexandria to do it better, nevertheless, ultimately, the parnasa comes back to the house of Garmu, to the house of Avatinas. From here, you learn, Ein Adam Nogeh B'mucha L'Chavero. One person cannot take away something that is set aside for another. Ve'in Malchus Nogeh B'Chaver Ta'afilu Kimalei Neima. Just like one monarchy cannot overlap with another monarchy, even a hair's breadth. So we'll say a very profound Gemara, also just teaching us proper hashkafa when it comes to parnasa. Because very often when it comes to parnasa, we think that we're all fighting for the same slice of the pie, but it's actually not true. Not only are we not fighting for the same slice of the pie, we're not even fighting for the same pie, right? Every person has their own pie. And again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu determines how much of that pie you're going to get. But even in general, This goes to the general concept of lo sachmod, of not coveting. Sometimes we see someone have something that we want, and we assume that because they have it, we can't have it. And ultimately, again, that's not the way that it works. You have what you're supposed to have. I have what I'm supposed to have. Your success does not come at the expense of mine, and mine does not come at the expense of yours. Whatever every Jew is supposed to have, that's what Kadosh Baruch Hu is mazmin them. And the truth is, our parnasos are not tied into each other. Our success are not tied into one another. Kadosh Baruch Hu determines for each person individually what they are supposed to have. Incredible. Hogros ben Levi. Let's go weiter. So remember again, Hogros, Tanya, Kishahu nosin kolo b'ne'ima, when Hogros wanted to produce beautiful melodic sound, Machnis godol sochpev is interesting. He would stick his thumb in his mouth, umaniach etzva'o ben hanimin, and his fingers in his mustache, and he would produce such beautiful sound that it was like startling to the other kohanim. Tarabanan ben kamtsar lo ratza. So again, once again, Hogros did not want to teach this to anyone else. So as a result, the Gemara calls him a rasha. Tarabanan ben kamtsar lo ratza lelamid amay saksav. Ben kamtsar, similarly again, was able to hold 4 quills and write 4 letters simultaneously, but he did not want to teach anyone about this. Amra alav she'enotel dalit kulmasin ben etzbaosav. He was able to hold 4 quills between his fingers. And therefore, if there was a 4-letter word, he would be able to go ahead and write the word at once. Amrulo, they said to him, so they said to him, tell me, why don't you teach people? Why can't you teach this skill to others? Below, so the Gemara says, Kulon matzatshuva l'divrayim, ben kamtsar lo matzatshuva l'dvarav. Supposed to say all the earlier people had answers, right? So Avatinas had an answer, Garmo had an answer, but yet for these individuals, really both for Hogros as well as for Ben Kamsar, they had no answer. There was no good reason why they couldn't teach this skill to someone else. For the earlier people, I've also mentioned in the previous Mishnah, Munbaz, Haleni, Ben Katin, these individuals, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, Val Ben Kamtzer v'Chaveirav, and Ben Kamtzer and his friends, which really just includes Hogros and others, Ne'amar v'Shem Rishoim Yerkav. It says the name of the wicked should wrath. So remember again, according to the Maharsha, even though, like we mentioned before, even though Garmo and Avatinas give reasons why they don't want to teach the secret of Mechem Aponim and Ketores, at least according to the Maharsha, the rabbis did not believe them. They did not believe. They felt it was still motivated out of a personalistic selfishness, and therefore again it was still governed by Shem Rishem Yerkav. Amr Belazar, Rakavivos Tala Bishmosan. What it means is that literally again, Rakavivos will say is rust. Rust should set upon their names, which means what? Delo maskinon bishmaihu. That people should not name their children after these individuals. So you shouldn't name your kid Garmu, or Avatinas, or Hogros, or Ben Kamtsar, should not utilize these names. So the Gemara says, really? Maser Ravina, but yet there was a story about a child by the name of Doeg ben Yosef. So we'll say, so Doeg ben Yosef, Shehenichu Aviv ben Katan Le'imo. So it was one child named Doeg. I will say, now Doeg was a rasha. Who was Doeg? Doeg was the chief advisor of Shaul, right? Doeg wanted David HaMelech killed, but what he was unsuccessful in that, but what he was successful in is that he had Nov HaKohanim eradicated, right? Because of his Lashon Hara, the entire city of Nov, except for one person, was wiped out. So Doeg was a huge rasha. Yet the Gemara says, here's a story of someone who named his kid Doeg. Meaning, we just said before that Shem Rishaim Yerkav means you shouldn't name your kids after Rishaim. I just want to point out, this is an interesting discussion in the poskim about what happens. Let's say a person has a child and they want to name after a grandparent or some other relative, but the relative was a really bad person, a really objectively bad person. So is there an inyan to dafka not name after someone who was a rasha? So there's a discussion in the poskim, but the Gemara this Gemara that you see from Shem Rishem Yerkav means we don't name after Rishoim. The Gemara said, 1 second, there was a kid by the name of Doeg ben Yosef, Shenichu Aviv ben Katan Le'imo. So his father left when he was a young boy. B'chol yom v'yom haisi imam modedaso b'tfachayim v'nosenes mishkalo shel zav lebeis hamikdash. When he was a little boy, it's beautiful. His mother measured his growth, and she would give the equivalent of his weight to the Beis Hamikdash in gold. He would give the equivalent of his gold to the Beis Hamikdash. What happens? Because Shegavra Oyev, when the Romans overtook the Beis Hamikdash, or it could be Mikdash Rishon also, Tavachto va'achalto. There was such profound famine in the Beis Hamikdash that what happened? She slaughtered him and she ate him. Va'aleha konin Yirmiyah Navi laments this. Im tochalna nashim parim ole tifuchim. So Mashiva Ruach HaKodesh va'omeres im yeharig b'mikdash Hashem kohen v'navi. So both say the Gemara quotes this as a raya that you see. You just learned V'shem Risham Yirkav means don't name after Rishayim. But here's someone who named his kid Doeg after Rasha. So you see that people do name their children after Rishayim. To which the Gemara says, this is the raya Chazi Maisalik Bey. Look what happened to this kid. So I'll say, if anything, this is a further proof, right? Unfortunately, look what happened to this child. So therefore, again, this is another raya that we do not name after a shon. Incredible. Amr Belazar, Tzadik me'atzmo, v'rasha mechavera. Both say interesting Gemara. If you look at Rashi, Tzadik me'atzmo, al yedei maisam niskal tova. A tzaddik is remembered for the good based on his own actions. But a Rasha, interestingly enough, through association with other Rishaim, is known for his wickedness, even if he himself did not perpetrate the wickedness. What does this mean? The Gemara says, Tzadik me'atzmo d'chsiv zecher tzadik livracha. So the tzaddik is remembered from his own actions, because the pasuk says the tzaddik is remembered for blessing. V'rasha mechavero, yet the Rasha is often remembered for his wickedness through the association with other Rishayim. D'chsiv v'shem Rishayim Yaakov. It uses the plural. The name of the wicked, plural, will rot. Amrali Ravina l'humi Rabbanan, tava mesader agarata kamei. Ravina said to one of the Rabbanim who was arranging agarata in front of him, and he said as follows: Mina ha-milsa d'amar Rabbanan. From where is this thing that the Rabbanan say, Zecher Tzadik Livracha? But say, where do we learn the concept of Zecher Tzadik Livracha? Where do we learn it from? Amar lei dahaksiv Zecher Tzadik Livracha. What do you mean, where do we learn it from? The pasuk says, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. What do you mean, the car? No, mida'orais samna. Both remember again, Zecher Tzadik Livracha is a pasuk from Mishlei. From where do we learn biblically the concept of Zecher Tzadik Livracha? D'chsiv, because the pasuk says, Vashem Amar hamechasa'ani ma'avram asher osa. Remember again by stone. Hashem says, should I go ahead and hide what I'm going to do in stone from Avram Avinu? Uksiv va'avram hayo yiyeh l'gai gadol va'atzum. Shabbos say, interesting. Hashem says, should I hide from Avram what I'm going to do? And right after Hashem mentions Avram, the pasuk says, and Avram is going to become a great nation. So you see over here, Zecher Tzadik, the moment that you go to mention the Tzaddik's name, Livracha, you extol the qualities of the Tzaddik as well. That's the biblical source. From where do you know the concept that the name of the wicked should rot? Because the pasuk says the name of the wicked should rot. To which the Gemara says, no. But midaraisa, from where do I know this concept? D'chsiv vayel ha'ad, because the pasuk says that they camped all the way until Stone. We're talking about by Lot. So there's a mention of Stone, and then right after we mention Stone, uksiv va'anshe Stone roim v'chatoim la'Hashem ma'od. So we'll say, so once again, you see in the Torah, once there's a mention of Stone, there's a mention of the wickedness of Stone. So these are the biblical sources for these concepts. Amar Belazar, Tzadik dar ben shnei rishon v'lo lama mi'ma'asem, Rasha dar ben shnei tzadikim v'lo ma'asem. So we'll say this is incredible. Elizabeth Tzadik says that Tzadik could live in between two Rishaim, yet still maintain his personal piety. He doesn't learn from them. Yet the Rasha could go ahead and live between two Tzadikim and doesn't learn from their righteousness. The Shabbat says an incredible yesod in how people become set in their ways. And this could be being the tov, being the ra. It could be tov that the tzaddik can become set in his ways, and therefore even if he lives amongst the Rishaim, he does not learn from them. But unfortunately, the opposite is true as well. The Rasha could become so set in his ways, and even though he's living between tzaddikim, he does not learn from them. Tzaddik dar ben shnei rishayim v'lo mamasem. What's the example of a tzaddik who lives between two rishayim, doesn't learn from their actions? Ovadia. We'll say that's Ovadia, the Navi who lived in the palace. He was part of the king's entourage, and yet the king was an incredible Rasha. Achav and Achav's wife Izevel, two incredible Rishayim, yet Ovadia did not learn from their ways. Rasha dar ben shnei tzaddikim v'lo mamasem. Similarly, again, a Rasha could live between two great people, and he did not learn from them. Ze Esav. Esav grew up in the house of Yitzchak and Rivka, yet unfortunately he did not learn from his parents. Amar Elazar, mibirchasan shel tzaddikim atalamet klala l'sharishayim, umikilalasan sharishayim atalamet bracha l'tzaddikim. So it's an incredible yisod. Right, from the bracha of tzaddikim you could learn a curse for the rishayim, and from the curse of the rishayim you could learn a bracha l'tzaddikim. How so? Mibirchasan shel tzaddikim atalamet klala sharishayim dichsiv ki adativ leman asher yitzaveh. I know that Avram will instruct his sons to follow in my way. Uksiv basrei v'yomer Hashem zakas stom va'amora kiraba. So right after Hashem discusses the bracha of Avram, the contrast to stone becomes so apparent. And from the curse of the Rishayim, we learn the bracha of tzaddikim dichsiv va'an sheisdom ro'im v'chatam la'Hashem v'Hashem amar al Avram achari parid lot me'imo. Fine. Amar Elazar, b'shel tzaddik. Well, this is beautiful Gemara. B'shel tzaddik echad olam nivra. It is worth it to create the world even for one tzaddik. But say the power of one good person, the power of one good individual. It's worth it to create an entire world for one tzaddik. Shneimar. But listen how beautiful this is. Vayar Elokim esa'ar ki tov. Hashem saw that the light was good. And what's the light? What's the tov? Ve'ein tov el tzaddik. We'll say, what's the tov? The tov ultimately refers to the righteous person. Shneimar imru tzaddik ki tov. Ultimately, again, say that the tzaddik. So we'll say, such a beautiful Gemara. You know, Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't need the entire world to be tzaddikim. He just needs one person to be a tzaddik. Now we'll say, but you know what the chap in life is? You can't rely on someone else to be that tzaddik. So I know that it's worth it to create the world. All the world needs is one righteous person. But I have to worry that maybe no one else is righteous. And therefore, again, I have to rise to that occasion. I have to try to become that righteous person for whom the entire world is worth it to be created. Amar Elazar, Gorim Galas Labana. This is a very profound Gemara. If you go ahead, Mishachech Davar Mitalmudo. Now, what does this phrase mean? So we normally translate this as anyone who forgets a piece of his learning causes galus for his children. Shenemar, Vatishkach Torah Salokecha, Eshkach Banecha Gam Ani. Now, I want to point out something very interesting. The word mishacheach literally means causes oneself to forget, right? Because it could have just said kala shochech, which means if you forget, which would be a very scary Gemara. Because that would mean if you ever forget something you learn, you cause galus, exile for your children. Well, say some of us forgot what we learned at the beginning of this shiur, right? Forget about again. So we'll say, so what does that mean? Say for mishacheach means that I care so little about what it is that I'm learning that ultimately I cause myself to forget. We'll say, in life, you don't forget the things that are important to you, right? No one forgets that I can't run a red light, right? I know that. I might run the red light, but it's not because I forgot that I shouldn't run them. The things that are important, I retain. If I actively forget something, that's a sign of disregard. So if I forget my Torah, that's a sign that it's not so important to me. What does it mean that if a person forgets their Torah, they cause gullus for their children? We'll say, what's gullus? What's gullus? Gullus is disorientation, right? I'm disoriented, right? Gullus, I normally am here, and I'm uprooted, dislodged. A person who doesn't care enough to retain their Torah causes confusion for their children. Because ultimately, again, what kind of chinuch am I giving my child? How am I raising my child if I can't retain the Torah that I'm learning? Then what are the values which inform my child rearing? What are the values which I'm using to shape my children. If my Torah, I actively forget my Torah because I don't care enough to retain it, then ultimately I'm causing gullus, disorientation, and confusion for my children. So we'll have to stop over here. We'll pick up Eretz Hashem with this Gemara tomorrow. Incredible. Shkoyach.